Rain against the glass, a cheap neon sign flickering. I just wanted a quiet coffee. The girl's hands are shaking. She's young, orphaned, alone against a pack of hungry wolves. Shadow, my partner, feels the tension. He doesn't growl. He waits for the word. One of them grabs her wrist. Hard. I see the bruise forming. The line is crossed. They're laughing, thinking they own the room, thinking she's an easy target for their games. The owner turns his back. Fear is a poison. It paralyzes the weak and emboldens bullies. I've seen this before. Different country, same cowards. My blood starts to boil, cold and steady. I lean down, a whisper only he can hear. Shadow, guard the exit, now. The beast moves like a ghost, muscle and teeth blocking the only way out of here. I stand up. The room goes quiet. Time to teach these boys some basic manners. I don't need a weapon to be dangerous. I just stand there, letting the silence do the work. The air in the diner gets heavy, like the moments before a desert storm hits the camp. The leader squinted, his grip loosening on the girl. He's looking for fear in my eyes, but he only finds a reflection of his own insignificance. He's realizing this isn't going according to his script. The girl scrambled back, her eyes wide. She's seen enough trouble to know that when men like me stand up, the world changes shape. For the first time tonight, she isn't the one being hunted. His buddy tried to play tough, shifting his weight, but the atmosphere stopped him cold. There's a specific vibration a professional hunter gives off. Even animals, especially animals, know when they've wandered into the wrong territory. Behind them, Shadow was a statue of muscle and focus. He wasn't barking. Barking is for dogs who are afraid. He was just calculating the distance to the throat if I gave the next signal. I reached for my wallet with a slow, deliberate motion. No sudden moves. Every inch of my body was tuned to their heartbeat. I placed a $20 bill on their table, right over a grease stain. The lady said you forgot to pay, I said. My voice was a low rasp, steady as a heartbeat. I'm covering your tab. Consider it a gift. Now, you're going to apologize for the touch. They looked at the door, then at me. The exit was blocked by a beast, and the path forward was blocked by a ghost. The power dynamic had shifted. Now they were the ones looking for a way out. The leader didn't back down. Instead, he slammed a rusted blade into the table, the wood splintering under the force. I know that look. He spat, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and recognition. You think you're still the hero of the valley? You think because you saved us once, I owe you my life forever? The air in the diner turned electric. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a debt gone sour. A brother in arms who had traded his uniform for a leather vest and a dark soul. I didn't pull back. I placed my palm right on the spine of his blade, staring him down until he was the one who had to blink. I didn't save you to see you become the monster we were fighting, Miller, I said, my voice cutting through his bravado like a razor. The name hit him harder than a bullet. The other bikers looked at each other, realizing their leader wasn't the top predator in this room. They were trapped between a ghost from the past and a beast at the door. A plate shattered behind the counter, the sound echoing like a sniper's round in an alleyway. Everyone jumped, except me and Shadow. We've heard louder things in places much darker than this. The girl looked terrified, but the leader of the gang looked even worse. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the smell of old grease and even older sins. His boys were getting restless. their hands sliding toward the shadows beneath the table. They didn't know the history. They only knew their boss was being humiliated. But Shadow knew. He let out a growl that wasn't a sound, but a vibration you felt in your teeth. It was a warning from a predator that doesn't miss. I didn't even look at them. My eyes were locked on Miller, watching the sweat bead on his forehead as his past caught up to him. I leaned in, close enough to smell the stale beer and the fear on his breath. The girl isn't just a waitress, Miller. Look at her face. Look at her eyes. Tell me you don't see the resemblance to the man who gave his life so you could walk out of that canyon. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He turned his head slowly, looking at the orphan girl as if seeing a ghost for the first time. His gaze fell on the silver tag hanging around her neck, reflecting the flickering neon. It was the same tag we all wore, the one he had seen 100 times on a man who was better than all of us combined. The knife in the table started to wobble as his hand began to shake. The twist wasn't that I knew him. The twist was that he was bullying the only living memory of the man who died to save him. Miller looked like he was staring into an open grave. The silence in the diner was so thick you could hear the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. I kept my hand on the blade, feeling the cold steel. I reminded him of the ridge in the Hindu Kush, the smell of cordite, and the way the sun looked when it was blocked by the smoke of our burning transport. I told him about Sarah, the name of the girl behind the counter, and how her father, Captain Elias, stayed behind so we could get to the extraction point. Elias didn't die for his daughter to be humiliated by a man who wore the same patch. I watched the shame swallow Miller whole. His eyes weren't those of a hunter anymore. They were the eyes of a man realizing he'd become his own worst enemy. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had grown up with stories of a hero father who never came home, but she never knew the men who were there in his final moments. To her, I was just a ghost in a camo cap, and Miller was just a nightmare in leather. Now, the past was merging with the present in the most painful way possible. She looked at the silver tag around her neck, the only thing she had left of him. I saw her look at Miller, not with fear anymore, but with a profound, crushing disappointment. It was a look that cut deeper than any blade. She realized that the men her father saved had turned into the very thing he fought against. The weight of that truth seemed to settle on her shoulders, making her look older, more resilient. The youngest of the bikers couldn't take the pressure. He didn't have the history. He didn't have the scars. He only had the ego. He kicked his chair back, the screech of metal on linoleum sounding like a scream. "I don't care about your stories, old man," he yelled, but his voice cracked, betraying the terror he felt from the silent dog at the door. He reached for a heavy chain on his belt, thinking a weapon would bridge the gap between him and a professional. I didn't even turn my head. I just shifted my weight, my body instinctively coiling into a defensive stance that has been drilled into me through 1,000 hours of combat training. Shadow's growl deepened, a low-frequency warning that made the windows of the diner vibrate. The kid was out of his depth. I looked at the kid. I didn't see a threat. I saw a mistake. My mind went into a high-speed tactical loop. If he swings the chain, I drop low, sweep his lead leg, and use the momentum to put him through the window. It's not about anger. It's about physics and survival. But I didn't want more blood on my hands tonight, especially not in front of Elias's daughter. I kept my focus on Miller. He was the key. He was the one who had to choose between the man he was and the animal he had become. I told him, softly but firmly, that he had 5 seconds to get his crew under control before Shadow and I finished what the war started. The countdown was silent, but everyone in the room could hear it ticking. Just as the kid was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, Miller's hand shot out like a serpent. He grabbed the kid's wrist with a grip that made bones creak. "Sit down." Miller's voice wasn't a shout. It was a command from a man who had regained a flicker of his former self. The kid looked shocked, then withered under Miller's gaze. Miller turned back to me, his eyes wet but clear for the first time in years. He pulled the knife out of the table with a slow, deliberate motion and folded it. The violence was leaving the room, replaced by a heavy, somber atmosphere of a funeral. He looked at the $20 bill I had placed on the table, then at Sarah, then back at me. The monster was retreating. I stood up, the floorboards groaning under my boots. I whistled once, a sharp, clean sound. Shadow moved back from the door, his eyes never leaving the bikers, but his posture shifting from attack to alert. The way out was open. The rain was still pouring outside, the world beyond the glass a blur of dark blue and gray. I told them they were going to leave. They were going to pay the bill with their own money, and they were never going to set foot in this town again. If I ever heard their bikes within 50 miles of Sarah, I wouldn't be coming to talk. I'd be coming to settle the debt in full. The threat was quiet, which made it all the more terrifying. Miller didn't say a word. He reached into his vest and pulled out a handful of cash, far more than the bill required. He laid it on the table with trembling fingers. Then he reached into a small inner pocket and pulled out a tarnished silver star, a commendation for bravery. He placed it on top of the money, pushing it toward Sarah. It was his way of saying he remembered. He remembered Elias. He remembered the honor he'd discarded, and he was trying to buy back a shred of his soul. He stood up, his movements heavy, like a man carrying the weight of the world. His friends followed him, their previous bravado completely extinguished. They walked toward the door like beaten curs, not looking back. They stepped out into the storm. I watched through the fogged glass as they kicked their bikes into life. There was no roaring of engines to show off this time, just the somber drone of machines heading into the night. I stood there until the red glow of their taillights vanished into the rain. The diner felt different now, emptier but cleaner. The air was breathable again. I felt the adrenaline start to recede, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that only veterans truly understand. Shadow came over and leaned his heavy head against my thigh, his tail giving a single, slow thump. We had done our job, but the real work, the emotional aftermath, was just beginning. Sarah approached the table as if it were an altar. She picked up the silver star, her fingers tracing the worn edges. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for answers to questions she hadn't yet learned how to ask. I saw the daughter of my friend, a man who gave everything for people who didn't deserve it. I saw her strength and her pain. I didn't know if I had done the right thing by bringing the past back to her. But seeing her hold that medal, I knew she finally had a piece of the truth. She wasn't just an orphan in a roadside diner anymore. She was the daughter of a hero, and now she knew that the world hadn't entirely forgotten him. "He was the best of us, Sarah," I said, my voice finally losing its hard, tactical edge. "And he'd be proud of you. You stood your ground tonight." She didn't cry. She just nodded, her jaw set in the same determined line I remembered on her father's face. I realized then that courage isn't always about holding a rifle or facing down a gang. Sometimes it's just about showing up for your shift and holding on to your dignity when the world tries to take it away. I picked up my cap, adjusted it, and prepared to head back out into the rain. The mission wasn't just about protection. It was about restoration. I stood at the threshold, that thin line where the stale, greasy warmth of the diner met the sharp, clinical bite of the midnight storm. Behind me, the world had shifted on its axis. Sarah was no longer just a girl counting down the minutes until her shift ended. She was a woman who had finally reclaimed a piece of her own soul. I watched her through the reflection in the glass as she placed that tarnished silver star next to a faded, salt-stained photo of Captain Elias. In that small, quiet gesture, the ghosts of the Hindu Kush finally found a place to rest, far away from the blood-soaked canyons and the smell of burning diesel. The world is a chaotic, often cruel place, and sometimes the only thing that keeps the absolute darkness at bay is a simple reminder that sacrifice isn't forgotten, that it echoes through time. I felt a strange, heavy sense of peace, a quiet closing of a chapter that had been bleeding in my mind for over a decade. Shadow sat patiently in the downpour, his fur matted with rain, his intelligent eyes fixed on the empty road ahead, waiting for the only leader he had left. He didn't care about medals, history, or the complex debts of men. He only cared about the next mile and the safety of the pack. I stepped out, the bell above the door giving one final lonely chime as the latch clicked shut with a definitive sound. The neon sign "Open" flickered once, hummed with electric tension, and then stayed bright. A small, defiant lighthouse in the middle of a vast, rain-swept nowhere. I realized then that I hadn't just saved a waitress from some local bullies. I had saved a holy memory from being tarnished by the very people it was meant to protect. We walked in a silence so profound, it felt like the world had held its breath. The steady, rhythmic crunch of my boots on the wet asphalt and the soft, rhythmic padding of Shadow's paws were the only heartbeats left in this landscape. People often ask me, usually after a few drinks in some nameless bar, why I keep moving. Why I don't just find a quiet porch, a rocking chair, and let the wars stay buried in the desert sands. But the truth is, men like me are the perimeter fence of civilization. We are the ones who walk the line in the dark, so people like Sarah can serve coffee, feel safe, and dream of a future that isn't defined by fear. The road ahead was a long, black ribbon stretching into the cold heart of the state. But I didn't mind the distance. Every step away from that diner felt lighter, as if I had left a part of my own shadow back there with the metal. The encounter with Miller had been a brutal mirror, a glimpse of the rot that sets in when a man loses his way and lets his trauma turn into a weapon against the innocent. I looked down at Shadow, his silhouette a ghost beside me, and I knew that as long as we were moving, we were still on the right side of that moral line. The rain started to let up, turning into a fine, ghostly mist that clung to my tactical jacket like a shroud. I thought about Elias and the way he used to talk about the after. He said the real test of a soldier isn't how he acts when the bullets are flying, but how he carries himself when the guns go silent and there's no one left to give orders. Tonight, I think I finally understood the weight of that silence. By the time the first streaks of dawn began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burnt orange, the storm was nothing but a memory. The air was crisp and sharp, smelling of wet earth, pine needles, and the promise of a new day. We found a spot on an old, moss-covered stone wall overlooking a valley that looked peaceful enough to be a postcard from a world without conflict. I sat there for a long time, sharing the last of my dried jerky with Shadow, watching the way his ears twitched at every rustle in the undergrowth. He's more than just a dog. He's a living testament to a type of loyalty that seems to be in short supply in the modern world. I thought about the bikers, Miller and his crew. They weren't monsters, not in the way the men we fought overseas were. They were just broken, hollowed-out men who had forgotten that their strength was meant to be a shield for the weak, not a club to break them. Miller had been given something rare tonight, a second chance. Not a gift from me, but a mercy from the memory of a man who was infinitely better than he could ever hope to be. Whether he takes that narrow path toward redemption or sinks back into the mud of his own making isn't my concern anymore. My job was simply to hold up the mirror and show him what he had become. I took a deep breath of the morning air, feeling the cold settle deep into my lungs, clearing out the smell of the diner and the stale fear. It's funny how a simple cup of coffee and a chance encounter can reshape the entire geography of your soul. I wasn't just a wanderer anymore. I was a witness to the fact that even in the dark, some lights refuse to go out. I pulled my own military ID from my wallet, the plastic yellowed by time and cracked at the edges from years of travel. The face staring back at me was younger, harder, and filled with a terrifying certainty that I no longer possessed. Back then, I believed the world was a simple place, divided neatly into heroes and villains, black and white, us and them. Now, after miles of road and 1,000 nights like this one, I see only shades of gray, just people trying to survive the weight of their own shadows. I realized that my service didn't end when I turned in my rifle and walked away from the base for the last time. It just changed its form. Every town I pass through, every person I help, is a small installment on a debt I can never fully repay to the ones who didn't get to come home. Sarah's father was a hero because he chose to die for something greater than himself. I have to find a way to be a hero because I lived, and that is a much heavier burden to carry. You have to find a reason for your survival every single morning when you wake up in a strange bed or under a cold sky. You have to make sure that the life you were spared wasn't wasted on bitterness, regret, or the hollow pursuit of anger. I tucked the card away, sliding it into the deepest pocket, the one closest to my heart. It was a reminder of the man I used to be and the ghosts I carry, but it no longer dictated the direction of my boots. I was moving forward, not because I was running, but because the road is the only place where the truth stays clear. I reached into my jacket pocket for my lighter, and my fingers brushed against a small scrap of paper I hadn't noticed before. Sarah must have slipped it there with the stealth of a scout while I was distracted by the bikers leaving the diner. I unfolded it carefully, the handwriting neat and precise, though the ink was slightly blurred by the dampness of the night air. "Thank you for coming back for him," it read. At first I thought she meant her father, a final acknowledgement of the story I told. No, then it hit me. She was talking about Miller. She saw what I did in that room. I didn't just protect her physically. I reached into the wreck of a man's conscience and pulled him back from the edge of becoming a total animal. She saw the act of reclamation, not just the act of defense. It was a perspective that hadn't even crossed my tactical mind. In my world, you neutralize threats and secure the objective. But in her world, the daughter of a man who died saving others, you heal wounds and find the lost. Maybe she was the real teacher in that diner tonight. A warrior knows how to win a fight, but a survivor knows how to offer forgiveness, and that is a much more difficult skill to master. I folded the note with more care than I gave my own maps and placed it in my wallet. It was more valuable than any medal or cash Miller could have left on that scarred table. It was the only proof I needed that even in a forgotten diner on a lonely, rain-drenched highway, humanity can still find its way back to the light if someone is willing to stand in the gap. The sun finally broke over the crest of the hills, shattering the mist and casting long, golden shadows across the cracked asphalt of the road. The world began to reveal itself again, looking brand new and temporarily washed clean of its sins. I didn't know where the road would lead today, which state line I would cross, or whose story I would stumble into next, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't care. The destination was never the point. The movement was the only thing that mattered. Every mile was a hard-won victory over the heavy gravity of the past, a steady step toward a future that didn't have to be defined by blood, fire, and the screams of the dying. I felt the familiar, comforting weight of my rucksack, the dull, predictable ache in my veteran's joints, and the steady, grounding presence of the dog at my side. It was enough. The story of the orphan girl and the bikers would eventually fade into the local folklore of that small town, just another legend people tell over late-night drinks about the day a ghost in a camo cap came to dinner and set the world right for an hour. But for me, it wasn't a legend. It was just another Tuesday on the perimeter. Another day keeping the watch and making sure the light stayed on for those who couldn't hold the matches themselves. We are the travelers, the watchers, the ones who don't belong anywhere but are needed everywhere. We leave pieces of our souls in every place we touch, in every life we intersect with, whether we mean to or not. Sometimes it's a scar that never quite fades. Sometimes it's a memory that brings a smile in the dark. And sometimes, if we're truly lucky, it's a spark of hope that starts a fire. The diner would keep serving its bitter coffee and greasy eggs. Sarah would keep her father's metal close to her heart as she built her own life. And the road would keep calling my name with its siren song of distance and duty. In the end, we are all just weary travelers looking for a place where the rain doesn't sting quite so much and the ghosts stay quiet. And as long as there are people willing to stand up, to speak the truth when the room goes silent with fear, the light in the window will never truly go out. My name doesn't matter, and my face is just one of many you'll forget by tomorrow. What matters is that when the moment of truth arrived, I didn't turn my back. I didn't look for an exit. I stood my ground and reminded the world that there are rules even in the wilderness. That is the only etiquette that truly counts in this life. That is the code.